Anybody, anywhere,
It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen.
This pass caught by Paulsen, the tight end.
And from 106.7 The Fan, Grant Paulsen.
Welcome into Take Command with Logan Paulsen, who spent a decade in the NFL. I'm Grant Paulsen, and you check out Logan on all the Commanders content. Of course, I'm on 106.7 The Fan each and every day from 2 to 6:30. You can watch this podcast on the 106.7 The Fan and Team 980 YouTube channels if you want the video. For audio, we are available wherever you get your podcasts. And please subscribe, rate, review, spread the word, tell your friends, do all that podcasty stuff. Also, we got a mailbag segment or two coming today after some Commanders news. The mailbag questions you'll hear us answering came to us from listeners like you in the comments section of this podcast or on social media. A lot of them to my DMs on Instagram at Grant H. Paulsen is a good way to get them to us. I'll see those and put them in our little folder for answering in the future. Logan, what's going on, brother? How are you?
Not much, man. Excited to talk a little bit of football. Excited to get to these mailbag questions. They're always fun. Guys leaving good questions. It makes these shows interesting and different, which is always great. So
yeah, I dig the kicking off of the week with the mailbag. Just kind of setting a tone for what people care about in Commanders land each and every week. But let's start with a couple of news items on the team side. The first is something I'm really, really excited about. The team announced an announcement. So there will be new uniforms announced and debuted and displayed on April 15th. There's a lot of speculation as to what this means. We've been talking about this in town for years, but the 91 era Joe Gibbs throwback Redskins unis that they wore twice on Sunday Night Football against Denver and Seattle last year, and then again on Christmas Day against the Cowboys, the whites were not only the most popular jersey they had, but they were perfect and flawless, and I thought it was a home run for ownership and the team, and it looked like the thing that me and so many people grew up loving. And so the dream that has been alive is like maybe there's going to be some burgundies as well for the road. And so that's kind of everybody's hope, but the video teaser that they put out, I'm sure you saw, had a lot of homage being paid to that era, to the trophies, to some of the players of the late 80s, early 90s. The other thing is there was a clear helmet box as well, which makes everybody think, oh, this might not just be the jerseys with the Block W helmets, but something's going on with the helmets as well. So it's exciting, man. People have been wanting more of the old school look, and we might be getting it not just for a couple games as an alt, but as a full-time uniform.
yeah, no, I think it is exciting, and I think that's one of the things you're always dealing with in a rebrand is like how do you kind of make it something new while also keeping the nostalgia for the old thing, right? And the continuity between the two, I think, is something that's super important. And you see other organizations around the league kind of trying to do the same thing. The Tennessee Titans with the Houston Oilers, like that's an important part of that organization's history. But like keeping that thread is really important. So yes, I'm excited about what this could be. I'm excited for the fan base, and I'm excited for people like you, Grant, who grew up watching this team. Like I don't have that same connection, obviously, because I'm not from the area, but people who are fans of, the old Redskins uniform, that old look, like I think that'll be cool if they could find a way to kind of tie that in. And I think this new ownership group is aware of that, and they seem to be taking steps to get that done.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think everyone had opinions on how they would feel or what it would be like after or before the rebrand, I should say. And then, after there was a new look and a new name and everything. And maybe some people, called their shot correctly. I know for me, after 2/2/22, like seeing the different shades of colors and seeing the different uniforms, it had an effect on me more than I thought it would in terms of feeling like you were almost watching this expansion team. It wasn't like that. I always said, if you hand me a can of Coke and a Coke is still in the can, but you change the label, you call it something else, you change the color, it doesn't matter because I'm still drinking Coke. And I don't feel that way anymore, really. What they did on those Sunday night games, what they did for the Cowboys Christmas Day game with the uniform was like, for a lot of us, kind of emotional to see again. It was really, really cool. And it was reviewed favorably, obviously. The favorability was very high, correctly. But I just think it's a home run for this ownership group. And they continue to do things, to your point, where they're able to do something really difficult, which is thread the needle between new era. This is a different team name. This is a different thing. But also there's a lot of people that care a lot about the old thing. And how do we respect that? I don't think that's an easy thing that they've been trying to do, but specifically with this ownership group, I think they've crushed it. And assuming that this ends up being a little bit more of a lean in toward the 90s era Gibbs uniforms and the old Redskins looking gear without a Redskins logo, that would be pretty cool. I'm really excited, just to nerd out for a second, about the helmet and seeing what that looks like. And there's a lot of possibilities there. Is it the Block W? A lot of people speculate a spear could be involved. So there's plenty of excitement for this, Logan. April 15th is going to come quick. It also gives us like another benchmark about halfway between now and the draft of like something that the fan base counts down to. So it was also pretty smart the way they laid it out on the calendar, I think, too.
Yeah, 100%. I also think it speaks to like, Josh Harris and this ownership group being kind of growing up in the area and being fans of what you were fans of too. And I think they understand kind of that they empathize with the current fan base and some of the, difficulties that have come with the rebrand. So yeah, I think they've kind of just been really consistent in terms of doing things that needed to be done at a really high level. Like I think about some of the additions and changes they've made at the practice facility and just how much nicer that's gotten since they've taken over. Like they've just done a really good job. And so I think hopefully this is another feather in their cap of things where they kind of seem to have their finger on the pulse of what the fan base needs and what they want. So it'll be exciting.
April 15th is the date to jot down on your calendars for the release of the first look at the new uniforms. As far as the players will be donning those uniforms, because let's face it, that's probably a little more important in terms of the outcome of games. There is a new corner coming to the Commanders in the form of Ahkello Witherspoon, 31 years old, played his college ball at Colorado. He's a California kid who played for the San Francisco 49ers, third-round pick, 66th overall. Way back in 2017, he was in San Fran for the first 4 years of his career, then went to the Steelers for 2 years and has spent the last 3 years with the LA Rams. There was a time where he was a full-time starter for the Rams just a few years ago. Last year, he played in a handful of games, started a couple of games. I know you played with Ahkello Witherspoon. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah. Do you have his injury history on there too, Grant, while I'm talking, just to kind of remind me because I don't remember exactly. But I think Ahkello
he's only played 17 games one time. In terms of playing more than a dozen, it's only happened twice in his career. Missed 11 games last year. Missed almost all the 2022 season and about half of the 21 season.
Yeah, so I think that's the one asterisk with all the stuff I'm about to say. I think Ahkello is very talented. Like I got to play with him in 2017 in San Francisco, his rookie season. He's tall, he's long. I think he's got decent ball skills. I think he's really good in terms of like press man situations. He's got a good feel, and I think like obviously at this point in his career, he's something different. Like you said early on, he was kind of a full-time starting player who was pretty good in that conference, which is a tough conference to play in. And now obviously things change, like father time waits for no man. But I do like the signing because I think if you look at the DB room, it's something we talked about on our Delane podcast. What was the LSU cornerback? I'm forgetting his name at the moment.
Mansour Delane.
Mansour Delane, thank you. I want to say Akeem Delane, but that was right. Mansour Delane, thank you. Like one of the glaring areas of need for this team currently is the defensive back, specifically corner. So getting some more depth in there, somebody with starting experience, someone who can mentor kind of young guys. I think that's an important part. And the other thing is I said mentor, but I also think he can come in and compete at a certain level for starting minutes if you need him to. So I think this is a good signing. I think it's a necessary signing. And again, like for areas of the roster that needed kind of patching up before heading into the draft, I think this is one area, and this feels like a good fit. Obviously, Adam knows him very, very well, so I love that connection. And I love the idea of bringing in people that you know and are familiar with and are going to fit and adapt to the Dan Quinn culture here in Washington.
Knee, ankle, hamstring, he's missed some decent time with, among other things, just looking at the injury history in more detail here. He had a multi-interception game back in 2021. He's got some ball hawking tendencies, 13 picks in his career, so some ball skills there for Ahkello Witherspoon. But big. I mean, that's what stands out to me is like the size, to your point.
He's a big kid.
He's listed 6'2", 215. That is massive for a corner. That's, 99th percentile height. That's 99th percentile weight, basically at the position. So that size and that length, especially for what they were doing with DQ previously, you think about the traditional, as you said, like Quinn corner, that plays. I don't know why size would be a whole lot different for Durante Jones and his scheme. You could comment on that if you'd like, but I just think having someone who's got some length, some size on the outside, helps because it's not necessarily what everybody else on the roster is. They've got a few undersized guys, so I like that juxtaposition. But remember, they just needed veterans. We talked about this at receiver, where they needed to go out and sign a couple of dudes that filled out the roster, maybe gave you a chance to play, but they're just there kind of competing. Enter Ioane Brown, enter Van Jefferson, who's been a journeyman. They have at least 5 corners that are going to be carried on the 53-man, probably 6, honestly. And they had 3 on the roster before this move. So they just have corners that need to be added. They still need to sign another 2-3 veterans at least, even if you don't draft one, because they had Mike Sanders still, trying to have a bounce-back season on the outside this year. It looks like that's his best position. Trey Amos starting opposite him. And then they went and got Amik Robertson to play in the slot. But otherwise, there was nobody else left. Everybody else has departed or is a free agent. So I just thought this was like your Van Jefferson type move to bring in a veteran to help you compete and kind of buoy the back end of the roster. But there is some upside here, too, if he's healthy.
I think that's 100% right. And that's why it's kind of exciting, right? Because it's definitely a depth move right now when they make this signing on March 27th, right? Or whatever they did it yesterday. But I do think that context is important, right? That like he's a depth piece, but because of the experience, because of the background, because of the size, the length, he could challenge and make a push here, right? He's a professional football player who's seen a lot of ball, played a lot of football. So I think that's an outstanding point. It's something that is really important about this signing is they need guys, but I like the idea of signing a guy who could be more than just a depth piece, right? Kind of be more than just a camp body or whatever it is. So I think this is in that vein of something that needed to happen, but also I like the caliber of signing. I like the caliber of athlete they signed. I think if I remember correctly, he also has crazy long arms. He is a little bit of a freak at the position. So, with regards to you said something there that I thought was interesting about like Dan Quinn's defenses and the size that's still important in Durante Jones's defense. I'm not sure. I think that's still yet to be seen. But I do like the player. I think this is a good football player when he is healthy, when he is on the field. And again, over the last couple of years, that's been tough. But I like the depth piece. I like the size. I like the ad. And hopefully, again, he can kind of find some traction here in Washington.
Yeah, that'd be good to see. And I think to thread the needle of like, okay, this is a guy who's back of the roster, but might actually help with Ioane Brown style, is where you're going to be. And it's also important to note, we're not at the phase of free agency anymore where they're signing the guy that we were breaking down before free agency on this show, or that people are going to be overly excited about or buying a whole lot of jerseys of, right?
That's a great point.
A lot of those guys have signed. This is a different phase of the offseason. This is now you're going to be 30 plus. You're going to be signing probably, 1-year deals. A lot like we've seen in the past because there are so few players on the roster in the grand scheme of things. Let's get to our mailbag questions next. I've divided up into 2 segments. We're going to go current roster in segment 2, and then we'll hit a bunch of draft questions rapid fire for Logan in our 3rd segment today. You're listening to Take Command. Welcome back to Take Command with Logan Paulsen. I'm Grant Paulsen. It is time for the mailbag. Got a bunch of questions that came in via our comments tabs on the podcast, wherever you get your audio, or in my messages on social media at Grant H. Paulsen. Logan, of course, is at Logan Paulsen NFL. All right, Logie, let's start with the current roster. Jeremy wants to know, after our Daron Payne conversation just a couple of pods ago, he said, you guys didn't mention the possibility of a compensation pick as a reason to keep him. He wants to hear about that. I actually thought that was an interesting point. Probably should have come up in the convo. When you have a player the caliber of Payne, if he were to walk this offseason, you often do get a middle of the draft, sometimes like end of the 3rd round, back end of the top 100 kind of comp pick as a ceiling, maybe a little lower than that. But if we're talking about trading him and we're saying, hey, you can, move him now for a 5th round pick or a 4th round pick and, eat a little bit of money, but open up the cap possibilities. He's saying, would a compensation pick be equally as interesting, and then you still get the year of production?
No, I think that's a great point. It's one of those things you kind of kick yourself for not mentioning in the moment we were talking about it, but it is a huge factor. And I think it's also a huge factor when talking about the trade value and the contract too. And so what I mean by that is like, so for example, like we were kind of kicking around the idea of like a 5th or a 6th round pick for Duran that maybe you could then package and then add a pick in the third round or whatever, hypothetically, right? However, like, I think that's a big factor in terms of value of the player. And what I mean by that is, like, if you just wait a calendar year, and Duran's very productive, the contract's good, and he gets picked up, obviously that's a third round pick. So, like, why would I trade him for anything less than a third round pick at this point if I know that I'm going to get a comp pick that's in that third round range? So I definitely think that's a huge factor. And, like the question said, or like you stated, like, just getting that year of production, you can afford it. It's not going to break the bank. Next year he walks, you get another pick in the top 100. I think that's a huge factor in the Duran, mathematics in terms of keeping him on the roster.
Yeah, if you want to hear the arguments for shopping him, possibly trading him, go back and listen to our pod from a couple of episodes ago, because all of that still stands. Last year, 8 hits on the quarterback, 7 TFLs, and 3 sacks for Daron Payne, who will be in his age 29 season this year. Ben wants to know, at wide receiver 2, he says, are there trade candidates out there that could be an option for Washington, with free agency dust having mostly settled? Said someone that needs an extension maybe. We've got cap to play with. Why not work the trade market at wide receiver?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think a really good way to be thinking about the receiver 2 spot moving forward. I do think the trade idea is really good, and I think the post-draft cut is also a really good opportunity to get some people. The thing about this is as tough as I'd have to go look at every single contract for the receiver, and I just haven't done that yet. But I do think this is a good thought to have. The one problem with it that I would say, or the one shortcoming potentially, Grant, is that there's not a lot of draft capital to be handed out. So, like, what are you going to give away? Like, what is this team going to want? And, like, where is this player at in their career arc? And so those are some questions that I would have to ask. And it's good. It's going to be a pretty tight needle to thread because, again, they have all these picks outside of the top 100. They have the 5th, they have the 2 6th, and they have a 7th. Like, could you get a player, again, on an expiring deal in that kind of situation? Potentially, but it's not going to be like Drake London, hypothetically, who's going to hit free agency next year, right? Like, that's not the type of player you're looking at in this scenario.
Yeah, and I would also say that there was a pretty significant class of wide receivers that felt like, maybe they were trade candidates, and the well is dried up on a good bit of those guys at this point. Based on moves, see DJ Moore, based on teams coming out and saying, actually, we're not trading this guy right now. Brian Thomas Jr.'s name comes to mind with some of the reporting done there, because that was a guy I would have been interested in. He would have been fascinating to see what he's actually worth, because year one, he had one of the great rookie years in league history at the position, basically. And then in year 2, he really struggled, was one of the league leaders in drops and kind of took a step back. So the juxtaposition of the performance is insane, and that makes the value hard to quantify. I'll just throw a couple names out there just that are intriguing that I think, are possible players you could call on, if you wanted to. Jordan Addison of the Vikings is really interesting to me. They have paid Justin Jefferson all the money. Are you going to pay 2 guys good money at wide receiver? Addison's gotten into some trouble off the field and had some run-ins and some issues that you want to probably iron out and do some due diligence on. But he's 24 years old. His cap hit is right around $4 million. He was, a former Biletnikoff caliber receiver at USC and Pitt in college. And I just think maybe going somewhere else and being able to spread his wings would be ideal. I've always liked his game. He's interesting to me. Another name that I thought of was Jerry Jeudy, who I'm actually not as high on, to be honest with you. He drops a lot of passes and has some flaws, but we have also seen Jerry Jeudy have a Pro Bowl season where he did play at the level when he came out of Alabama in round 1 that people thought he was capable of. 2 seasons ago, 90 catches for 1,200 yards. This past year, really bad quarterback play, just 50 catches for 600 yards. But he's a perennial, on average, right around 60 catch guy over the last 4 years or so. And that's a guy that on a bad rebuilding team, I would not be stunned if you could get him at the right cost. But I don't anticipate Washington trading for a receiver like that because they just don't have the picks to give up.
I think that's right. I think, and again, like, it would be, like you said, I think the Jeudy one is really interesting. Like, that type of player, or even the Addison one, like that type of player, there's a little bit of schmut on them. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's the off-field stuff with Addison, Jerry Jeudy, the production's been a little bit up and down, right? Like, they'll move that player, but you're going to have to give up a pick. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Deebo Samuel situation last year, where it's like, Deebo Samuel in San Francisco. He's kind of on the back half of the career in terms of health, production, body weight issue, right? All those types of things. And you kind of say, oh, we can get him for a 5th round pick. Could you do that? Absolutely. And again, you do have those 2 6th-round picks, which I think is important to keep in mind here when you're talking about this. But it's not going to be, I can't even think of a big, like, it's not going to be like JSN or somebody like one of these big top end names. Obviously, JSN side the extension, but it's a different caliber receiver.
Those guys aren't available.
They're not. And then the more
anything. Go to, when my wife, she does these auctions where she's always trying to like buy something random. And she's like, I just got this thing I'm so excited about. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And she brings it home and I'm like, this is the thing.
What is
right?
it? Yeah.
Like, yeah. So like it's available for $8 in the auction, probably for a good reason. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think that's a great metaphor. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you've got nobody's coming in here to catch 90 balls for 1,400 yards sight unseen, but Addison's 24 years old. Mm-hmm. And in Judy's case, he's 26 going on 27. He's got a 90 catch campaign on the resume. So those are just names looking around the league from a trade chip standpoint that I would say at receiver I would call on if I was trying to, but I don't think it's realistic for Washington. SW wants to know, how do you grade the safety spot right now? Who starts opposite Nick Cross, and why is safety a position that Washington should be targeting in the draft?
So right now, I think the safety spot's in a decent position, actually. And so what I'll say about that is I think re-signing Will Harris is a sneaky kind of positive re-sign, or he might have been on to the 2nd year of his deal. I don't remember the exact logistics there. But Will Harris, Nick Cross, I think Will Harris's communication, his physicality, his intelligence, I think that was something that, I really undervalued last year. And watching him in the preseason, watching the defense when he did play was a huge add. Couple that with Nick Cross, who's got some experience, can be kind of his box player. I think you feel really good about it. But I also don't think you need to sleep on, Quan or Revo or Tyler Owens, right? There are some really talented Percy Butler. There's some talented athletic pieces in the back end there that play with good physicality. So I think that spot's in that position specifically is in a pretty good spot. However, I will also say that I do think the safety class in this year's draft is very, very deep. So I think you can find people in that 5th, 6th, 7th round area that have starter potential, starter upside, which is very unusual for the safety position. In the last couple of years, I've covered the draft. So even though I think the safety position's fine, I think it's actually better. I think it's pretty good at the moment. I think you feel very confident and secure in that. I also think that you could draft somebody because of how deep and how long that tail is. It kind of is the same thing with the tight end position, honestly. I do think the tight end position in the draft is very long. So I think the value where the Commanders are picking will be higher. So don't be surprised if they end up picking someone there.
Will Harris, just to mention the contract, 2 years, $8 million when they signed him. So he was under contract for this year, which was nice because of the injury last year. And they did have intrigue in him and probably would have brought him back anyway. Nick Cross, who's starting with him, comes over from Indianapolis, coming into his own as a 24-year-old University of Maryland product, the Matha Catholic High School, 96 pick in the 22 draft, was a 3rd rounder. And he's a guy, Logan, who has averaged 130 plus tackles the last 2 seasons from the safety position.
It's unbelievable.
That physicality, that aggressiveness coming downhill, and it's made possible by speed to get to the football, to get across the field, to make stops. I mean, he runs a 4.35 40. So when you do that, that's what they're looking for. They wanted to get younger. They wanted to get faster. The depth, to me, like I prefer most of their safety depth as special teamers. When you're talking Jeremy Reeves, who's a All-Pro and an ace, they just re-signed. Percy Butler, speed, can bring the hammer. Quan Martin is a guy, to your point, is really interesting, but I know we talk about him a lot on the pod. He's played at a super high level in the past. I think back to the playoff run and the pick 6 against the Lions and the performances at the end of 2 seasons ago. And then last year, this is not my opinion, the team sat him twice and throughout the course of the year. And Dan Quinn kind of took him to task in press conferences after. So he's in a make or break kind of year, it feels like. I'm fine with safety, though. I guess to double down on what you said, wouldn't be bad if they drafted Caleb Downs as an example, and you got a rock star. They don't have that on the roster. You know what I mean? So there's always a place to go get a stud, but is it above the threshold of like requisite level of adequacy? I would say yes. And then if they want to make that the pick at 7 to go get the superstar, then no problem. Everyone else gets pushed down the depth chart and finds a way to deal with that,
Yeah, and I guess I totally ignored the possibility of them taking Downs at 7, but I also think so Downs is a stud. I've talked about him a lot on this show, absolute baller, and I don't think any of these signings preclude you from bringing that piece in here. But I also look at the tail end, right? There's Cole Winooski from Texas Tech, who's this 6'4", 220-pound box hybrid player who plays a little bit in the post there for Texas Tech. Robert Spears-Jennings from Oklahoma, who's an athletic freak, long arms, good height, and plays a star position at Oklahoma, right? There's Xavier Nwakpa from Iowa, who's an absolute killer in terms of physical tackles and ran really well at the combine for his size, right? There's just a lot of pieces down the board. Now, this is, again, all preliminary. We're still about a month out from the draft. Where do those guys actually go? But I look at them, I'm like, man, those guys are good football players. Michael Taffy from Texas, kind of an undersized guy, but really good instincts and good football player. And then now the other thing you got to negotiate too for the safety spot is there's all these linebackers, right? Like Kyle Lewis from Pittsburgh, who's undersized, but kind of plays the safety star spot in that defense. There's Harold Perkins Jr., who ran the 4.39 at LSU's Pro Day and is kind of this 6 foot, 215, 220-pound linebacker safety in between guys. So now you're kind of saturating that market where you get guys in between that could maybe play safety, maybe play linebacker. So I do think the value in this class at linebacker, kind of that star spot, and at safety later is really, really good. So if you wanted to add somebody that's going to contribute, I think you could totally do it. If you want a stud, obviously Caleb Downs at 7 definitely should be on your radar.
You mentioned Taffy. I'm wondering, obviously at this point in your life, you would never consider it, and you would only have lettuce and kale, and maybe some broth. But was that when you were 5? Were you doing that? Did you ever have taffy at some point? That disgusting stuff that gets caught in your teeth?
So my mom, I love my mom, is so in on taffy. She loves saltwater taffy. We go up to, where my grandma used to live in Cape Cod, and they have these little stores on the side of the road that just sell saltwater taffy. You can go fill your bag up. And so my mom was in on it. I was like, well, my mom's in on it. So this must be really good. And I'm kind of middle of the road on it. There's the nostalgic element of the saltwater taffy shopping with my mom, but the taste of it and the texture of it is not something that I'm super high on. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of a funny.
Taffy is awful. I can't. It's if a Starburst was terrible and worse to get stuck in your teeth or something.
That sticky kind of.
Right.
Yeah. I'm dude, we're on this. It sounds like we're aligned here. I have a nostalgic attachment to it which
I appreciate.
But
I wish I was with the Paulsens on vacation back in the day, getting that taffy. So if you had to eat candy, I know that's saying if you had to do this terrible, awful thing, right? But if you had to eat a piece of candy, what would be the candy you would burn your terrible decision on?
So I am a big nut, seed, and chocolate kind of guy. So M&Ms with the almond or the peanut in there are good, but that's kind of where I Mr. Good bars. Everyone hates them, but I love them because the texture and the sweetness. I don't know what it is. But
it's part of it that you feel like you can convince yourself that there's some value in it because
there's probably some of that going on.
So if I'm saying no nuts in the chocolate, this is strictly just useless, terrible decision making, what candy are you going with?
So, not a big candy guy, right? Don't love
Shocker.
it. But
stop the presses.
But what I get steamed up for is a little bit of ice cream. If we go to the store, so I like a little bit of ice cream. So candy, don't. But if you're hey man, let's go get some ice cream, and my kids we got to get ice cream. Usually they can kind of ring on my arm, and I'll get some ice cream with them.
I love that. So first of all, I'm not a candy guy either, really, to be honest. If you told me right now I could never eat candy again, it's not a big loss for me.
You're
I'm
not
a guy.
damn.
Yeah, I'm not a guy that's got candy at my house, or I'm always eating candy. If you told me you're taking away salty snacks or
chips and stuff,
baked goods and sweets, or you said, ice cream, now we're gonna fight. Now this is Tom Wilson dropping the gloves, and now we're just going at it in the middle of the ice.
We're drawing a line in the sand. This
Absolutely.
is it. I'm a man of principle.
So, but when you say when you say you eat ice cream, I imagine it's a very rare special thing where once every few months. Like, do you have ice cream in your freezer every night at 10 p.m.? You're scooping an ice cream into the bowl.
It's so, like, just as an example, like my birthday was in February. My wife got an ice cream cake. So, like, that's a big thing. Kids get stoked, wife gets stoked, everyone's excited. She gave me a piece of ice cream cake that I could keep in the fridge. Like, because everyone just in my house devours any kind of sweets, cakes, it's gone. She's like, you can keep this for as long as you want. So my birthday was in February, right? And I just finished that piece of cake last night. Just like a normal, like, just take one scoop in the mouth, the whole thing. Like, so I was able to ration that piece of cake for, 40 days almost. So, that's kind of how I do it.
Outrageous, diabolical thing I've ever heard. So your kids know, like, that's Dad's slice of cake.
Don't touch that cake. That's mine. Yeah.
That's Dad's scoop of ice cream from 2023.
Yeah.
Every night he licks it a little bit and it melts down some more. And after 3 years, it won't be in the fridge anymore. That's basically what we're doing.
Yeah. And my wife always gives me a hard time about it. But, that's how I like to enjoy my ice cream. So back off, kids.
Hey, you're going to live to 104. And you'll get the last laugh. Don't you worry about that. All right, next, some draft questions. Take command mailbag. He's Logan. I'm Grant. Welcome back to Take Command. Let's get into the NFL draft with our questions. Remember, you can always send questions for our mailbag episodes at Grant H. Paulsen on Instagram. Comments below wherever you're listening to this pod. Logan is on social as well. Let's just go rapid fire here, Logan, because I did grab a handful to get through. John wants to know about his team building philosophy. He says he thinks you should establish your team floor on defense in free agency and then raise your team ceiling on offense in the draft. I've got thoughts on this, but I want to see what you think.
Yeah. I don't know if I understand, like, the necessity for the defense in free agency and the necessity for offense in the draft. I think they should inform each other, right? Like, if it's a strong free agency class and offense, I'm going to invest there, right? And if it's a strong defensive draft, which this one currently kind of feels that way, it's like we could maybe kind of parse some stuff out there too. And I think it's about, like, kind of what you're able to land in free agency and how that affects the draft. Like, they're symbiotic in terms of they're connected at a high level. And so I don't know if I would kind of say defense and free. Like, I feel like you're pigeonholing yourself there a little bit too much.
So that's correct. In my opinion, the flaw with Moneyball in baseball as a philosophy, which works to an extent, is that you are minimizing your talent pool that you're choosing from. And so when you only draft college players, you miss on Ken Griffey Jr. and Mike Trout. You can't draft those guys because they're high school talents. When you only draft on-base players that walk a lot in college, you're not drafting the guy with some swing and miss who hits a lot of home runs or whatever. And so I don't like shrinking talent pool. I don't like saying, well, in free agency, we got to make sure we're not bad by having a solid defense. But now it's draft time, so let's find the weapons. Every draft is different. There might be years where the strength of the draft is on defense, not offense, right? I think as a general idea, though, what he's saying is kind of maybe the way forward for Washington this year, in that their free agency did elevate their floor immensely, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because they went so heavy at edge, because they brought in so much talent. And maybe now, we'll see, but if you went wide receiver 7, wide receiver 71, or Love at 7, wide receiver at 71, that is a ceiling play. That is now a elevate Jaden Daniels, make that offense elite again. And it might work out that way. But as a philosophy, paradigm, rule or something, I wouldn't have not only that philosophy, but probably any that I'm married to all the time. PB24 says, Logan, you talk a lot about banked reps. He says, do you have any concern about Commanders' offensive linemen who ran the power gap scheme last year, running a lot more zone? He says, do you think they have the movement ability to do it at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a concern anytime you change offenses or anytime you change philosophy in general. Like, so with regards to the offensive line, like, that's a position that is, it's predicated on banked reps and experience and, like, understanding combinations and leverages and how this guy's going to hit the double team and where I can go with my hat if he's going to do this, if we get this look. So yeah, I think it's something to be concerned about. But I do think that when you go to the offseason, the OTA phase, the training camp phases, these coaches now have gotten really smart about kind of finding ways to accumulate a lot of repetitions for the offensive line, like separate from the team, because they have like limitations in terms of context. So when you go to an OTA practice, or when you watch a mini camp practice, for example, the thing that jumps out is that like the offensive line is on the side, just constantly repping different patterns, different positions, different fronts. And so they're able to kind of accelerate. So instead of them getting, like traditionally, let's say, like in a normal team period, you have like 4 team periods, you had 12 reps a period, you get like about 48 reps. Then certain guys are only getting a fraction of that because there's some depth issues. Now they're off to the side, just literally like rapid firing rep after rep. So like there's days where I'm not counting obviously, but I'm assuming they're getting between 80 and 100 reps on the side of the field there. And it's some of it's walk through tempo, some of it's full speed, but that's where the coaching becomes super important.
So in my quick addition would be, I think Tunsil can play any scheme at an elite level. Like you could ask him to do anything. I think Connerly, I don't want to say a better fit, but I think he's made for this if they do a lot of zone blocking and movement stuff. And then I would say I'm interested in Brandon Coleman and Chris Paul and that competition, if there is one. Like, I think Coleman could be suited pretty well if they go that direction. But that'll be interesting to watch play out. Sticking with O-line, Nick asks, I like this. He listens to the pod because he called you O-line Paulsen, which is the nickname that I've given you for crowbarring in offensive linemen every time we talk about the top 10. He said, why is O-line Paulsen so high on taking a guard at the top of the board? Isn't the point of zone blocking to deleverage the O-line? He references Mike Shanahan, who said you don't win with guards. Obviously, that's kind of how I cut my teeth covering the NFL, was studying the Shanahan scheme. It's my proclivity. And Mike one time in his office said to me that exact line. He's like, you don't win with bleeping guards. And I'm sure he said it many, many times.
Yeah. No, and I don't disagree with that. I think the reason I bring it up constantly is because like when you talk, like when I went to the combine, for example, and we talked to scouts and, people that are in the front, like when you said, like, who are the best players in the draft? Like a lot of people are like, oh, well, there's Jeremiah Love, there's Sonny Styles after he did his thing, Caleb Downs, and then Vega Ioane was the other guy from Penn State. And so obviously there was a select group of people that had him as a blue chip player in this draft. And so obviously if the board falls a certain way, right, and all those other players are gone, those blue chip players are gone, and there is one blue chip player remaining, and it is Vega Ioane or Spencer Fano or, Francis Maui Noah, like whoever that blue chip player is for you on your board, and you're sitting there at 7, you're going to take him. Would I advocate for doing that? No. It's more just kind of to make the community who's not as dialed in on the fans as the draft as I am, like aware that there are people who think there are 4 blue chip players in this class. I think 3 of them we're very familiar with. We talk about them all the time. Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Love, right? But there's a group of people who think there's a 4th, and it's Vega Ioane from Penn State, and he's a guard. And all those positions are not of traditional value. So I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying if you're trusting your draft philosophy, your draft principles, everyone, best player available, there is a world, I think it's pretty small, where the best player available is a guard from Penn State or the tackle from Miami who is going to convert to guard. And so it's more just like, in terms of likelihood of that happening, I think that's probably 10%. I just don't want, everyone to freak out and be like, why are they drafting this guy? I'm just kind of trying to bring some education and awareness to it.
Yeah, which is what you do on the pod, and it's why people listen to Take Command, which I like. For people not familiar, it just because that's a name that isn't, as you said, it's not out there as much.
Yeah.
So it's Vega Ioane, and his name.
Try to pronounce his first name, by the way. Like, just try to give that thing a rip.
Bro. So that's what I was gonna say. I think it's like Olai Vega or something like. But he goes by Vega. But if you want to look him up, it's Vega Vega, and then Ioane is Ioane. Penn State 6'4", 320. But that is not a name that has come up a whole lot.
Yeah. And so the reason that we bring it up is so like, again, like there is a would a receiver be better? Yes. Would a defensive playmaker be better? Would a cornerback be better? Probably.
But just to succinctly, you're saying like this might be a top 3 player in the draft. He happens to play guard, and he's probably not going to go because of that all that high. But you've brought him up, and mostly, to be fair, in the context when you talk about him, we're saying more than most drafts, the best players in this draft do not play premium positions. So like even Sonny Styles, who I can't get enough of, is a green dot, Mike linebacker. That's not a position that you're paying $20 million to in free agency. Right?
100%.
We talk ad nauseum about Jeremiah Love. It's the same kind of conversation with Ioane. All right, speaking of Love, really quickly, who is your comp for him? Do you buy the Gibbs Bijan talk in terms of the caliber of the player? Ooh. When you watch Jeremiah Love, like who's your comp?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've had a hard time with this actually, because I know some people have thrown out like, oh, he's Darren McFadden, or he's, one of these more upright runners. Like, Eric Dickerson was one that was thrown out recently that I thought was kind of interesting because of the upright posture when he runs. To me, I actually see more Gibbs to his game personally. I think the burst, the acceleration, that top end home run ability, coupled with how he moves as a pass catcher, seems to jive more. Now, no comp is perfect. I do think Jeremiah Love runs with more downhill power. I think his contact balance is a little bit better. So I do think he's a slightly better prospect than Gibbs, who was a fantastic, he was a fantastic prospect coming out and obviously become a great pro. But I do think that that's kind of where I see Jeremiah Love, just like a bigger, a little bit more robust, a little bit more physical Gibbs, excuse me.
He's the size of Rico Dowdle, but he's blazingly fast. You know what I mean?
He's a big guy, man.
It's rare. I see a little Jamal Charles. He's bigger than Jamal Charles.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
But that's kind of when I watched him, like the first guy that jumped out at me. Nate wants to know, he says, Chris Sims and O-line Paulsen. By the way, this is catching on. I love it. Rank Denzel Boston number 1 or number 2 at wide receiver and Tate lower. Why not trade back to draft the wide receiver? I don't know that I remember you saying that necessarily, that you have Tate lower. Like, is your wide receiver board with Tate?
So yeah,
down?
let's talk about this. I'm glad this came up because like on Drive to the Draft, we do that before the combine. We did that probably 2 months ago now. And so at the time I was like, I think Denzel Boston is a stud. I still think Denzel Boston's a stud. I think he's a really good football player. I think, however, after him not running at his pro day, after him not running at the combine, after a really kind of, I want to say poor on-field workout at the combine, I kind of went back and was like, maybe I'm a little bit too high on him as a mover, right? Because one of the things I thought to myself is like, he's returns punts at UW, he gets downhill, he can run a comeback, he's winning vertically. Like, he's more Mike Evans than he is just kind of name your generic big wide receiver. But if you're not going to run, like I personally believe you're hiding something. Like even Tetro McMillan ran at his pro day last year. He was the number 1 wide receiver. Like Denzel Boston's like the 5th or 6th wide receiver in this class by most boards. So like, why aren't you like, if you're not going to run a 4.5, you're going to run a 4.6, you're going to run like kind of a Malachi Fields kind of time. And again, I think that's something that is just in the back of my mind a little bit. I've since that first initial ranking moved him down a little bit because I'm kind of like the athlete, the workout, some of that stuff from the workout shows up in the film when you go back and watch it. So I do think you can trade back. And this is something we've talked about on previous shows. I do think trading back in from 7, if you can, I think Malachi Fields is Mekhi Lemon is going to be there. I think Jordan Tyson's going to be there. I think Cooper's going to be there. I think Denzel Boston's going to be there. I think even getting a high 2nd round pick with a guy like Jeremy Bernard would be absolutely huge in this year's draft. So I think there's a lot of really good receivers. I think trading back, regardless of who it's for, would be a good move. The thing we always postulate on this show is like, who's going to trade up and how far would you have to go back?
Yeah, I still think it's going to be hard to do. The hope maybe is they're in a place, because if there are, let's say, 6 guys other than Fernando Mendoza that are in a tier before a drop-off, maybe you're in the catbird seat where someone comes up to say, that's the last spot where we could get the guy we really, really like before we get a guy we just like. And maybe that's how it materializes. Denzel Boston's huge, by the way, if you're not familiar, 6'4", somewhere around 208 to 212 pounds, depending on when you're having him weigh in. Wide receiver at Washington, 60-plus catches the last 2 years, 830 and 880 in terms of receiving yards, combined for 20 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. But it is certainly giving you some pause when, we know that he's in the 4.6 range and he's decided he's not going to run maybe at all. I mean, at this point. before
He's not.
the
They
draft.
had their pro day. He didn't run, and so
Yeah,
to
so
me, it's
I
like,
was thinking, could he run it like private workouts?
I guess he could. That's what Tetro McMillan did, right? He had a hamstring issue, and eventually he ran it like a private workout, ran like a 4.5.4 or something like that, which is totally reasonable. So, like, for me, like, if he came out and ran a 4.56, 4.57, I'd be like, great, good.
What if he ran a 4.62 or something?
I'd be a little bit nervous because, like, most of the tight ends in this year's draft ran faster than that. Like Malachi Fields from Notre Dame, a guy that I like a lot, another big wide receiver, ran a 4.62 at the combine, right? And so you're like, okay, well, one of the questions I have on him is like, what is your top end speed and what does your short area quickness look like? And so obviously that metric is not a one-to-one corollary, but for top end speed for a guy who's a down the field vertical threat, like that's a little bit of a red flag, right? Because are you going to be able to do that at the NFL level where every cornerback runs a 4.4? It puts that into doubt a little bit. And so I love Denzel Boston's competitiveness. I love his physical toughness. I love how he catches the football. I love how he adjusts and competes for the football in the air. But like there are things and there are reasons, there are thresholds for the receiver position. And it just makes me a little bit nervous, a little bit less confident. Still love the player. But remember, the draft and tiering stuff is about confidence. So Carnell Tate has kind of migrated to my number one spot because I'm confident that he's at least going to be a good pro, right? Because of all the boxes he's checked in the offseason process.
Ruck says, it's a mailbag, take command. He wants to know, am I crazy for preferring Washington to draft Carnell Tate over Sonny Styles? He says Tate could hit an Alec Pierce level of production, which just got paid $29 million per year. He says if Styles becomes Fred Warner, which means, he's one of the best in the league, he said that's still only $21 million per year. To close that $8 million gap in production would be very unlikely. Look, no, you're not crazy, because like this is the conversation we've been having for months. And I don't mean like us personally, although we have constantly, but the royal we, everybody. This is the whole point. Like if Sonny Styles played a premium position, he might go 1-1. I mean, he's one of the greatest athletes in draft history. He's like number one of 2,300 linebackers in the RAS since they started doing it. But that is the whole problem. There are model-driven teams, more analytics-driven or what have you, that care more about that than others, obviously. But, yeah, when you draft Jeremiah Love at the top of the market, if he becomes a superstar, you're not getting as much value as if you draft Carnell Tate or if you draft, obviously, a tackle or an edge, if you draft David Bailey. Because if David Bailey on his second contract is a superstar, he's making $40 million a year. Mm-hmm. Jeremiah Love gets a second contract and is a superstar, by then maybe he's making 20, let's say, if he's McCaffrey or something, but still that's half as valuable in theory from a team building standpoint. So that is the entire conversation. So sorry to jump in, but I would say, no, you're not crazy. That's kind of the dialogue.
I think that's a great way to start it off. And that is the dollars and cents, the analytics argument, if you will. But like, if you're drafting a true blue chip player, which is why you call them blue chip prospects, right? Because quote unquote, that they're going to hit or they're going to be something special. And Sonny Styles is Luke Kuechly, and he plays for 15 years for your organization. There is value to that also, right? A game changing, green dot Mike that is going to captain your defense and kind of lead that defense into that top 10, top 15 range year on year because he provides that intellect and that consistency. Like that's what you're talking about, right? Like, is he that level of prospect? It's like, where would you draft Ray Lewis or Ed Reed? Like, that's another great one. Like, if you knew Ed Reed was going to be a Hall of Famer, like, would you have a problem taking him in the top 15 or top 5? No, you wouldn't. He's a beast, right? Derrick Henry. On a redraft, you'd probably draft him top 10 for sure, right?
Well,
like,
here's one I've got for you. I've debated this with my co-host on The Fan quite a bit, but like, he looks back on the Brandon Sheriff deal after he got moved from tackle to guard and they took him 5th and is like, that's not what you were trying to do. And I'm like, I don't care. He became an all-pro beast.
Yeah.
I would have let's redo that draft. Now, there might have been other players that were better. I mean, I don't remember the exact draft class, but my point is, like, if we're redoing the draft, I have no problem with drafting Brandon Sheriff. I don't care if he moved to guard. Morgan Moses, who they got the previous year, became a solid tackle. He became the best guard they've had, the only all-pro on offense they've had since I was in diapers, by the way, like first-team all-pro. I'm doing that. That's kind of where my philosophy's changed a little bit, and I don't think you can ever go like 100% in one direction to like, playing the dollars and cents or just good football players matter more or whatever. But I used to be like 3, 5, 7 years ago, way more like it is the top 10. I cannot draft a guard. I will not. And I don't really do that anymore. Part of it is because teams swing and miss all the time trying to find the right position. And it goes back to my talent pool thing. If I can't just – it's hard enough to, like, get this right. Think about it. Like, I had the comp the other day of the dating pool. It's so hard to find a person you're willing to spend the rest of your life with. If now that person has to, like, live in a certain place and be – make a certain amount of money and be a certain height and like all these things, have this certain personality. Like you just keep lowering and then the algorithm says, oh, there's a 0.7% chance you can find the person. Like I need to draft a player that's going to be really good. That is what I care about. The bonus points are if it's also at this position where I save money on the back end. But if I'm way more sure that Jeremiah Love's a beast than that, Carnell Tate is, then for me, I'm at a point in my life now where I'm just going to take Jeremiah Love. But I understand the argument is that that's ridiculous because Carnell Tate is theoretically going to make twice as much money.
Yeah, and we were just talking about guards, and I think about, Zach Martin for Dallas. Like, would you not draft him? And he was like this stalwart on your offensive line for over a decade, right? Quentin Nelson, same thing, right? Brandon Sheriff's a great example. So I do think that's the thing you're running into here is like, and this is the thing that's really hard about ranking and rating players. Like I have a lot of respect for this process now after doing it the last couple of years, like making a big board myself, is what is the actual difference between a receiver who's pretty good and a linebacker who's excellent? Like what is the actual difference between that? And that is something that's really hard to determine. And probably individual teams feel differently about it. And so like, obviously the guy who asked the question probably feels that the receiver should be valued more because of the money element. But in terms of play and value on the field, like I think that's one of the cool things about like EPA, for example, like estimated points added. Like when you look at that, you're dealing with fractions of percentages, and it's the same thing with the draft. So it's just a really interesting conversation, and it kind of goes back to like, are you trusting your evaluation over like long-term longitudinal studies? Because the other thing I'd say too is you could draft Carnell Tate and he's fine. He's just a fine football player. And then all of a sudden the value of the second contract is a non-issue, right? Same thing with the running back. Like, so I think ultimately the crux of the draft is you want to make sure you get the best football player possible when you're picking at 7 and when you're picking at 71. And that is something that, as we've talked about in this show a ton, is really hard to do because of all of the money floating around some of these positions. But ultimately, I think I come back to that as my home base. That's what you're trying to do.
He's Logan. I'm Grant. This is Take Command. Yeah, I would also just say for me, the draft that kind of changed my philosophy a bunch was the Lions 2023 draft.
Yeah.
And there are other data points along the way. But I remember that night going, oh, my God, they just took Jahmyr Gibbs at 12. And then they took Jack Campbell at 18. And I'm like, what, do they not know the rules here? Or they're doing their own thing. And as it turns out, you look back with Penei Sewell and some of these other picks throughout the years, and it's like they don't care what you think. Like they are here to draft football players that they like. They don't care that it's too early, that it's not the right round. And guess what? I'm not sure any team's had a better draft run in the last several years than the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I think then that same draft, they draft Brian Branch, who was this safety who no one knew how fast he was. Could he play nickel? He does, right? And they move up last year and draft Isaac Tesla. Like in the third round, everyone's like, what do they do? Like they are like, we want good football players. And I think that's something, it reminds me of the Dallas Cowboys when they draft Micah Parsons, for example, right? Like he's an off-ball linebacker who was a freak athlete, who grew into a larger role in the defense and became an absolute stud. And like, there's just like, that's the funny thing about everyone's like, oh, there's this way to do the draft. If you know how to draft the best football players possible, that's the best way to do it. It's not the analytics of it, like all this. It's how do you make sure we get the best football? Because ultimately you don't know until they get in the, like Kyle Pitts. Like I've changed how I evaluate tight ends because of Kyle Pitts. But at the time I was like, this dude's an absolute stud. Didn't work out that way. Brock Bowers, by comparison, he should have been a top 5 pick, right? But because of the Kyle Pitts value, F that. Brock Bowers, man, he's like the best player at the position almost, right? So it's just a funny thing when it comes to determine. That's the thing about the draft is determining value, and that's what's so hard about it.
Do you agree with me that if you knew what everyone was going to be, like it would make more sense to do it the dollars and cents way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But the problem is like the unknown of you just
don't
got to
know.
go with your gut.
You don't know.
All right, let's end the mailbag here. I thought this was fun to put at the bottom of the list here. Zach said, would Logan, the draft analyst, have drafted Logan, the football player? And what round grade would he have given himself in his evaluation?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's really fun. I got a funny story about this too. So I was out to dinner with my agent, and he was there with a former GM who's a really nice guy. He's like, I did your draft grade. I was a regional scout out, in California when you were coming out. And he's like, I gave you a draftable grade. I think he said it was like a 5th or a 6th round grade. And I was like, but I had a caveat in there. It was like pending on the 40-yard dash you were going to run, right? So I go to your pro day, I got my stopwatch out, and then you run like an abysmal, 4.95 or whatever you ran. And I was like, yeah, I remember that. And he's like, then I was like, oh, maybe he'll jump good. And you jumped like absolute dog poo, right? And I was like, yep, that's me. And then me and Steve, my agent, went out and they cried into their beer glasses for an hour, right? So I think my college film was pretty good. I think I played really hard. I was very physical. I was like your classic blocking Y. I had some pass game upside. But then you get to the pro day and you're like, this guy doesn't meet any athletic thresholds. So what are we going to do? So if I'm the draft analyst in me kind of says, well, like there's other people I'm going to draft who have higher upsides than this guy who I can walk faster than and can jump higher than a paperclip, right? So that's kind of where I'd come down on. I think the film was pretty good in college. And I think that grade of 5th to 6th round was probably right. But then I didn't hold up my end of the bargain, and I went out and, walked my 40-yard dash. So,
but I don't know how to ask this in a good way. Did you have a bad pro day, or is that what it was?
Like my times.
Yeah.
So if you ever, little peek behind the curtain here. When you're doing pro day prep, you don't actually ever really time a 40. You time 10s. So like the 10 is a really good indicator of what your 40-yard dash is going to be. So like I probably was about there the whole time, but the trainers are always trying to hype you up. Like on the day, you're going to hit this time. On the day, it'll be a little bit better. You're going to have that rush of adrenaline. But like, that's kind of what it was. I was like a not super fast guy. And looking back on it, like I would have coached and trained myself differently. Like I would have emphasized different things with me personally. Like as opposed to lifting all these weights, I would have been like, Logan, you have to run a 40 every damn day because we got to get you locked in on the technique. So to answer your question, like you are expecting a little bit of a bounce going into the day. And I didn't get any bounce. I'll tell you that right now.
The bounce did not happen. Well, yeah, I think, look, you got, as you will with your age at 104 or whatever I said, you got the last laugh, a decade in the National Football League. That'll do it for Take Command in the Mailbag episode. 2 more episodes this week. We're hitting you Monday, Wednesday, Friday, leading up to the NFL draft throughout this offseason. Thanks for checking us out. Thanks for our producer, Evan, and Jake helping us out this time around. For Logan, I'm Grant, saying so long for Take Command.